Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I've got a really lovely story for you tonight. And I love these stories when someone is very skeptical about a Bigfoot and then they realise that the creature really does exist and it just blows their mind. They just can't believe it. And this is the case with Mark from Seattle, who went on a solo wilderness trout fishing, camping and canoeing trip. And he got to have an encounter with Bigfoot himself. So let's get started, but before we do not forget to subscribe to my channel because I've got amazing stories ahead for you and you don't want to miss out, and I don't want you to miss out either. So let's get started. You're going to enjoy this story. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I had never believed in Bigfoot at all. In fact, the idea of such a creature ever existing was something that seemed preposterous and ludicrous to me. I had been an outdoorsy person all my life, and I had never encountered anything that made me even suspect remotely that there were creatures out there roaming our forests that we know nothing about. But now I know very differently. It all transpired when I left my cozy lifestyle in Seattle on the 3rd of May in 2016 and embarked on a solo trout fishing, camping and canoeing adventure, which was travelling along Ontario's lost canoe routes. I would be travelling up the West Orbidong River, past Megison Lake for 2 weeks with about 38 portages. I was very excited about facing the elements alone. My backpack was equipped with all the necessary camping accessories, such as fire lighters, a portable gas hob, a pot, sleeping bag, one-man tent, torch lights, cutlery, and freeze-dried food, and the list goes on and on. Of course, I had my canoe with me and all my fishing tackle. The first night I set up camp on the bank of Ranges Lake, where I prepared my own fire pit and cooked a large trout that I had caught. And believe me, nothing tastes better or melts in the mouth more than freshly cooked trout just out of the lake. It is awesome. After days of canoeing, hiking, fishing and camping, I was really on the roll. I was having a wonderful time on this solo trip, and it was so great to be so close to nature. The water so far was filled with so much trout that I would catch them for fun and throw them back in the water, admiring them and feeling their beautiful silky bodies, or however you describe them. Believe me, I've never seen so many large specimens in my whole life that were in such perfect health. I had seen many moose droppings along the way, but it was only on this day that I had seen several moose on the opposite side of the lake drinking at the water's edge, and it was such a wonderful sight to watch them. I sat there on the rocky ledge, which appeared to be naturally multi-leveled like a house with steps. It was about 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and I had turned in early for the night. On my fire pit grill, I was cooking a large trout and boiling some rice in a pot, and I was enjoying myself so very much. Suddenly I noticed the moose becoming frantic, and I looked up from the book I was reading in surprise. Something had clearly rattled the moose, but it seemed that they were trapped and could not run away, and I saw that they were circled in by these 3 giant-sized sandy brown creatures that at first I thought were bears. I immediately reached for my scope and focused on the creatures for a long while, and all I can say is that words failed me, and I was about to eat a whole plateful of humble pie. This creature from cryptozoology that I thought was out of myths and legends, I saw with crystal clear clarity through my scope, and I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I was seeing 3 Bigfoots working together as a team to take down a very large moose, and that's exactly what they did. Like sheepdog, these Bigfoots had herded the moose together so that there was no way of escape. But some, in absolute desperation, had jumped into the lake and were frantically trying to swim to the other side. The largest Bigfoot pounced on one of the moose and crushed his head into the ground with such brute force that the skull was crushed like a broken egg. I had never seen anything like this in my life. Once the moose was dead, all the other deer just scattered away as fast as they could, and the one swimming in the water turned around and swam back to the bank and joined the rest of the herd. Now that the Bigfoot had killed a moose, the creatures calmed down and tottered away, knowing that on this night they had fortunately escaped Bigfoot's dinner plate. I studied the alpha male, at least that's what I assumed he was, Despite the thick covering of brown hair, his genitalia were very, very large and prominent. The creature had an unusual head shape like a cone, and their faces were all grey and the skin very thick looking. The noses were big and appeared flat on the face, and the mouth was prominent and thin. As for their bodies, where do I start? Those bodies were huge. The largest one was definitely 10 foot, and the other two were significantly less, standing at about 7 feet tall. The biggest would have weighed about 1,000 pounds, and the girth on these creatures was expansive. In short, they were monstrously huge, and those moose were no match for such formidable foes. The largest Bigfoot dragged the limp body of the deer into the undergrowth, and then they vanished from sight. I remember that night hearing whooping sounds around the lake and loads of wood knocks that I learnt later are a common phenomenon with this Bigfoot creature. One of my last nights camping was interesting to say the least. I was lying in bed and awoke to hear this heavy breathing outside my tent. I was terrified because the heavy breathing was coming from something large that was definitely bipedal, and I was almost certain it was a Bigfoot. And by the way that they had killed those moose the other day, I knew that this wasn't a good situation to be in. I was no match for these creatures, but I lay there clinging to my rifle, wondering if I should use it, or hopefully wait for the creatures to go away. I could hear the feet pacing around my campsite, and then they were gone. But when I looked out of my tent, my canoe was floating in the middle of the water, and the stones around my fire pit were lying at the edge of the lake. I also noticed that the contents of my food bag were flung all over the clearing. Was this Bigfoot telling me in no uncertain terms to leave? I think so, especially the canoe floating on the water. That was a clear get-out sign to me. I was terrified, my heart was pounding, and I knew I needed to get out, but my legs felt so heavy that it was almost difficult to get going and to even move. It was still dark, but I did not care. I managed to retrieve my canoe, but got soaked in the process, and I packed up the canoe and I was out in the water even before the sun rose. I caught a glimpse of red eye shine, and I knew without a doubt that I was being watched by one of those creatures. "I'm leaving," I shouted. "Are you happy now, Mr. Bigfoot?" I was feeling suddenly a little annoyed, but I knew one thing: I was getting out of here and going home, and fast. I will say this though, even with the Bigfoot encounter, and maybe even because of it, this was one of the most memorable and enjoyable holidays I've ever been on. If you still do not believe in Bigfoot, I understand, because I've been there. But from one cynic to another, be careful of being too skeptical, be careful of being too cynical, because in a heartbeat, things can change like they did for me, and then, like me, you'll have to eat a plate of humble pie. Until next time, good night and goodbye.